Thanks everybody for coming out. This is the second annual Language Alumni Panel. We're happy to have three fantastic guests to come speak to us about what they did with languages here at Colgate and what they are doing with them now, how their careers have gone. It's very exciting. I want to thank our sponsors. We have several sponsors which helped make this panel possible. The Language Council, the Romance Languages and Literature, East Asian Languages and Literature, German, Russian, Eurasian Studies, Russian Eurasian Studies, Middle Eastern Studies, the Division of University Studies, the Division of Arts and Humanities, the Center for National Programs, and the Keck Center. As we begin this panel, I'd like to acknowledge that we are living in a tumultuous time politically and culturally. Racists, nationalists, and xenophobes have been emboldened by politicians with effects showing up here on our very own campus. The actions of these bigots must always be condemned as the work of insecure cowards who fear the unknown of another culture. Overcoming these hateful acts requires fostering a community of respect and understanding through meaningful cross-cultural exchange. I can think of no better way to achieve this goal than through pursuing more robust study of foreign languages and cultures. I will go so far as to argue that mastering one or more foreign languages is a social justice imperative. If we want the world to improve, we must speak the world's languages. Our three speakers here today celebrate that devotion to languages and provide a glimpse of the multiple paths open to those who take the time to truly understand another culture. I'll first introduce our panelists, and I'll turn the time over to them to each give some of their own thoughts that they prepared about how they've seen this happen in their own lives and their own careers, in the paths they've chosen. And then we'll open it up for questions, so think of questions as they speak. And we'll go and have an order here. You don't have to go in this order. You can choose whatever order you want. But our first panelist, Ashley Hill, graduated from Colgate with a double major in Japanese and International Relations. She studied Japanese starting from her first semester at Colgate and participated in Professor Harada's study abroad program her junior year. After graduation, she received a Fulbright Research Fellowship to study at Kansai University in Osaka, Japan, and later extended her time in Japan for another year at the Inter-University Center for Japanese Language located in Yokohama. Upon returning to the U.S., Ashley entered the Princeton University as a doctoral candidate in the politics department. After completing her master's degree, Ashley decided to pursue a career outside of academia and joined the American branch of Japan's largest insurance company, Tokyo Marine. Ashley was raised in Connecticut, loves slices pizza, as do I, and moonlights as a dog trainer aided by her bilingual Osaka native poodle that she brought back. Clementine Dunn Delieu, is that?
Delieu, that's one.
Clementine graduated from Colgate in 2013 with a double major in French and geology. She studied abroad with the Dijon Study Group in the spring of 2012 and was a French department tutor during her senior year. After graduating, Clementine returned to France through the TAPIF program to work as a language assistant in middle and high schools in the Lyon region. She currently lives in Boston and works as a geologist specializing in contaminated sites for ERM, an environmental consulting firm with a global presence. And Anna Kosa is from Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. She studied in Venice during her third year at Colgate and graduated in 2014 with a degree in international relations. After Colgate, Anna interned in the United Nations Development Program in Kathmandu, Nepal. In 2016, Anna worked in Cambodia at the Cambodian Children's Trust as a communications coordinator before returning to Canada to pursue a Juris Doctor at the University of Calgary Faculty of Law. During the school year, Anna also works as a legal researcher, analyzing the legal dimensions of food security in Canada's Arctic. She recently presented research at what I think is the best named conference I've ever heard of the 17th Annual Polar Law Symposium in Finland. So I'd like to give all of them a warm welcome, and I'll turn the time over to them.
If you're ready, go for it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, and I'm really excited to specifically talk about this topic because learning a language at Colgate and studying abroad, it really did help with my career and also just like my own personal development, so I'm really excited to share some of that with you all today. And the way I'd like to kind of gather my thoughts and talk to you today is that there's kind of four themes that I took from learning a language and studying abroad here. So the first is that it really instilled in me a sense of perseverance and determination. And the second was that it really expanded opportunities for me and it built networks. And the third is that I found it extremely applicable in real life. And the fourth is that it really created a sense of cross-cultural awareness, and it gave me the ability to interact with people of a different culture. But first of all, I'm just going to talk shortly about why I chose Colgate, because I come pretty much as far west as you can think of in Canada. Vancouver Island is just kind of above Seattle. And when I was in high school, Gary Ross, if he still works here, he came to my high school and he showed pictures of Colgate, and he talked about the liberal arts curriculum, which we don't really have in Canada, and I was just totally drawn to it. And especially when he was talking about international relations and studying abroad, and I always knew that I wanted to take international relations when I came here, so that's why I chose Colgate. And also why Italian. So when I first came here as a freshman, the two questions I got asked when people found out I was Canadian was, can you speak French and do you play hockey? Unfortunately, I had to say no to both of these things. I'm the worst Canadian stereotype ever. I mean, I wanted to take Italian for as long as I could remember. I went to Italy with my mom when I was 14, and I was just taken by the language and the people, and like the language is just stunning. You could say anything and it sounds like the most beautiful thing in the world. And also I wanted to study in Italy in my third year, so it just fit in nicely with that. So my first theme is that language instilled in me a sense of perseverance and resilience and determination. So learning a language, it's really hard, especially when you've never spoken that language before. So I did take some French in middle school. It was very short-lived. And our teacher told us that it's best to learn a language when you're young because you're not afraid to make mistakes. It's harder to do that when you're older because maybe you're more self-conscious or something like that. And so that was something I had to overcome, is that I had to not be afraid to make mistakes and to maybe say something potentially embarrassing. But the thing is, if you persevere and if you're very determined, it's so satisfying at the end of the day. My fondest memories at Colgate, because I took Italian all 4 years, was talking to Professor Merklin about Primo Levi, or talking to Professor Facchini about Italian films. And if you're willing to step outside your comfort zone, it really pays off. And I found that in my career as well, that when I stepped outside my comfort zone and when I lived abroad, it really paid off as well. And that also goes for studying abroad. I mean, I guess I naively thought that coming from Canada and studying here, because when I came to Colgate, I'd never seen it. Like the first day I saw it was the day I started school, essentially. And I didn't think that, I mean, when I went to Italy, I still felt a sense of culture shock. But I was able to adapt, and you know, you have to be flexible in those situations, and that's also it's very satisfying. And I wouldn't change my study abroad experience for the world because it was one of the best experiences that I ever had as well. And then next semester, I'll just add that, so I'm in my second year of law school in Canada, it's 3 years. I'm studying in Austria, and I'm going to learn German next semester as well. And so my second point is that it really expanded opportunities for me and built networks. And learning a language, it's extremely marketable. And it helped my career immensely, especially since I wanted to do international development and since I took international relations. And learning a language, it really did open doors for me down the line. So after I graduated from Colgate, I was lucky enough to get an interview at the UN. And I was so nervous because I had next to no work experience. So I'm like, oh no. It's gonna be interesting. But in my interview, I really emphasized language skills. And in Nepal, obviously, you know, they don't speak Italian there. But the fact that I emphasized language skills and that I was willing to learn another language and that I'd spent a semester in Italy, they really did appreciate that because they know that you're a determined individual and you're willing to learn, and also that you can be flexible and adaptable at the same time. And then I focused on the same thing when I went to Cambodia. So when I worked in Cambodia, I worked at a smaller grassroots NGO in Western Cambodia. And I also emphasized language abilities and like living in Nepal when I was there. And when I was in Cambodia, I also took Khmer lessons, which, I mean, my Khmer is not that great anymore, but that was a way to really meet friends and get to know my colleagues as well. And I also hired people when I was in Cambodia, so I hired the person who took my position. And one thing I looked for in the resume is if they knew another language. It didn't have to be Khmer because, so I worked in communications and they needed a native English speaker for my position. But I did look that they knew another language and that they had lived abroad, because working abroad, it's not just about doing the work, it's also that you're able to adapt to the country that you're in. And there's a lot of daily life challenges that you have to get used to. So when I was in Cambodia, it took me a long time to get used to the heat. I like Colgate because it's cold here. I love the cold. I mean, maybe that's stereotypical Canadian, but yeah, so I just really emphasize those things. And also learning a language and living abroad, it also built so many networks for me. So my director from the UN, we kept in touch, and he wrote my recommendation for law school. And I still keep in touch with all my professors here, which is great. So yeah, it really builds networks that way as well. And thirdly, learning a language, it's really applicable to real world issues. So to demonstrate this, I was just going to tell a couple stories. So when I was in Nepal, I was there in 2015, and I'm not sure if you guys remember, but there was the earthquake that occurred in 2015, so I was there for it. And after the earthquake, I helped with communication and relief efforts and communicated the safety of Canadians to the UN in Canada. And so one of my jobs was to man the communications tent. And there's only one other man there who could speak Italian. He was from Italy, but he was very high up. So after the earthquake, he went to one of the remote zones to do some relief efforts. So it was essentially just me who could speak Italian, but I didn't think I'd actually use it. However, there's this one man who came to the tent one day, and he was just traveling in Italy, and he really wanted in Nepal, and he just really wanted to help. And he also didn't know where to go because he couldn't speak any English. And so I was able to communicate with him, and I was able to help him. And I was also able to tell him, oh, your help is most needed here. And for me, that's obviously a devastating and tragic situation that I was in for Nepal. But I would say that's one of the highlights of my professional career, just because I was able to use that skill and really I think I was able to make a difference. And then secondly, another story, this isn't specifically about me, but it kind of just demonstrates the importance of learning a language. So when I worked in Cambodia, I worked for this NGO, and it was started by an Australian woman in 2010. And she had been traveling throughout Southeast Asia backpacking, and she was struck by how much poverty was there. So she volunteered at some orphanages, and she ended up at this orphanage in Battambang, Cambodia. And she worked there for, I think it was 6 months or something like that. And she found out that the kids were actually being abused. So she worked with the Cambodian government to set up her own orphanage, and gave the kids the choice, if they wanted to move from that orphanage to her own. And she ran that orphanage for a year or so, and then eventually she became fluent in Khmer. And she started talking to the kids, and some of them would tell her that they had families. And so she turned the organization from an orphanage to a family reintegration organization. And so now she supports the families so that they can take care of their kids. And my point of that story is that if she'd never learned Khmer, she wouldn't have delved deeper into the issue. And it's the organization now it's great. It's thriving. It's helped 100 families in Battambang, and it's fantastic. And then I guess my third story is just briefly, if any of you guys are interested in law school, learning a language has actually really helped me with that, because in Canadian law, we take a lot from Latin, and I have to read a lot of Latin words, so Italian's helped with that quite a bit. My fourth point is that it's instilled in me a sense of cultural awareness and appreciation, and I just, when I go to countries, I have such a deeper understanding for the people and for the language, and even if I go to a country that I don't know the language, I try to learn at least a little bit. And in Cambodia, I guess I just have an example of this. I took Khmer lessons, and most of my colleagues, they couldn't speak any English, so I would just like come into the office and say like the few words I did know, which was, "How are you? It's really hot outside." And it just like put a smile on their faces, and I made friends that way. And it was just like I could tell how much they really appreciated it. So yeah, that really it stuck with me. You know, it's just if you have that determination to learn a new language and to put yourself out there, it kind of goes back to my first point. If you persevere, it creates fantastic results. So yeah, I took so much from learning a language at Colgate for those reasons, and it just really opened doors for me. And I mean, I'm jealous of all you because I wish I could do it all over again. Not that I would like do anything differently, but just so I could do it again. So that concludes my formal remarks. So if you guys have any questions later.
So I want to start my talk by going all the way back to high school when I was an exchange student. So I actually wasn't going to talk about this because I could talk about it for hours, but I'm talking to Professor Gallucci, he encouraged me. So I was a French major at Colgate, but I wanted to learn a new language when I was in high school before going off and doing the French thing. So I went to Finland, and I was an exchange student for a year in a local high school, and I was the only American in my town. I was the only exchange student in my town, so it was like full immersion, and it was like one of the best years of my life, so I feel like everyone here can relate. Like, I loved that challenge of just a whole new language that I had no idea what it was going to be like, and so that's kind of like my foundation, is that I've always loved learning new languages, and even though I'm here to talk about how French has helped me, I'm not by any means like, you know, only rooting for the French majors here. I think there's just maybe one. Are there any French majors here? Just one. Okay, yeah. But when I was in Finland, I also studied German and Finnish and some Swedish, and obviously met other exchange students from all over the world. So that was like a really great experience that kind of set me up for the next part of my life. So that was Colgate, and I knew I wanted to major in French because that had always been a passion of mine. I knew I wanted to go to Dijon, so I did all those things, and I loved it, but I had no idea where that would actually lead me in my professional life. But I knew that learning new languages and traveling and meeting new people, I knew that would always be a part of it. I just didn't realize how much. So now that I can look back with 5 years of perspective, I would say that my language learning helped in a lot of obvious and a lot of really non-obvious ways. So the most obvious way that I applied my French background was I did the TAPIF teaching assistant program in France. So again, I think maybe some of you know about it, but there are similar programs in other countries. So I have friends who did JET in Japan, and I also have friends who are assistants in Spain, and so there are other similar programs in other countries. But I did the teaching assistant program in France for a year, and that was a really great experience because I knew that I didn't want to be a teacher, like long term, but in the short term, I had really enjoyed my experiences at Colgate as the department tutor. So my senior year, I did a lot of one-on-one tutoring with peers to help them with their compositions or getting ready for tests. So I really liked that like one-on-one interaction. And then I also, as a sophomore, I had done the tutoring at the Hamilton Central School, which I assume is still going on. But so we would go into the elementary school and kind of just get the kids thinking about other languages. So I really loved those like interpersonal interactions that learning languages let me do. And I knew I didn't want to take it to the extreme of actually being a teacher and having to grade and discipline students and like do all the hard part. But I loved the TAPIF program because it gave me all the good stuff that I really loved. So I was mostly working with middle school students, and that was more like the HCS program that I did here, where I just had to think of like fun games or songs, or like basically I had free reign to do whatever I wanted. And I will say that my critique of the TAPIF program is that there's like no organization or guidance whatsoever, basically. I think other countries might run it differently, but for me, I literally had carte blanche, and I could do anything I wanted. They were just like, here are the kids, do your thing. So I think for some people that might be hard, and it definitely was a little tough when I got started, but I ended up loving it, and I feel like it really enabled me to be creative and just like test new ideas with the kids. So in terms of like my personal development, I feel like it really helped me be flexible and kind of change things on the spot. Like I would have, a great idea that I worked so hard on, and then I would execute it with the kids, and maybe it didn't go so well, so I would like switch it on the fly, and then the next class I would do it differently. And it was like a really fun, kind of energizing year for me, where I would just spend all week planning lessons and trying to think of what a 12-year-old French kid would think was cool. And I think for them as well, what was exciting for me is that I got to kind of see what I loved about learning languages in them, where they would start to get excited, because the French school system can be very rigid and kind of dry and old-fashioned, where it's just like the teacher talking and you just have to write notes for hours. So I took my role very seriously, because I realized that I was like their only outlet for fun related to a language. And I also took it very much to heart. Like I knew I was an American trying to teach them English. I didn't want to make it about me or about English. Like it wasn't like I was trying to promote American, interests or whatever, but just in general, like about being open to the world and realizing like you're not just learning this language because your teacher's telling you, you're doing it because there's a world out there. And you could learn other languages too. So I had students that ended up really opening up to me about wanting to travel and go to other countries. And I was in a small town, so I think it was really impactful, and I took my role very seriously. I basically just wanted to be their friend, because I didn't have to like grade them or anything. And I've stayed in touch with some of them. I also worked in a high school, and that was a little bit more formal, where I had to do some one-on-one assessments. Not necessarily grading, but really just taking them out one by one, and they would do a little oral presentation to me, and I would listen and give feedback. So that was like less fun and exciting, but it was fun in a new way, because I was really connecting like on a personal level, and these were older students who were a little more mature, and I was helping them get ready for their big exam. So I feel like that program worked really well for me, and it might not work well for everyone, but I think if you are a language learner, you would definitely like get a lot out of it as well, as the students getting something out of it, because it plays on a lot of things that you already have, skills you already have as a language learner, the enthusiasm and interaction with people. So I don't know if any of you guys are considering that, but those programs are out there, and TEPI in particular is designed to basically be a year-long contract, and I could have renewed, but it really is kind of like another gap year that I think is great for people who love language and maybe don't know what they're going to do with it after college, but still want to kind of have that experience of going abroad. My other critique is that there was like no help with the actual logistics of moving to France. So I think some countries you can get away with not speaking the language and being a teacher there, but in France, I would have been totally screwed. So, you have to open your own bank account, you have to figure out your lodging, you have to do everything yourself. But I loved that, and that was like the best part of it, and just living a normal life in France. It was great. So that was kind of like the obvious way that I used my French degree and my experiences at Colgate. And then when I came home, I knew I wanted to get into my career in environmental consulting with my geology degree. And I wasn't sure that the French would really be that helpful, other than looking good on your resume, obviously, and like showing that you have those skills. But surprisingly, it actually has really helped me out in a lot of ways. I would say both soft skills and hard skills, which has been surprising. So as an environmental consultant, I'm on the team that specializes in contaminated sites. So we do a lot of site characterization, collecting a lot of samples, groundwater, soil, air, indoor air. So we characterize the sites, and then we propose remedial action to try to fix the sites, basically. So I'm working in the Boston area, so it's all very local. But my company is global, so we do have offices in over 40 countries, and that definitely drew me to the company. And I would say, I think when you're looking for jobs, even if it's not like a direct correlation to what you did with your language degree, I think looking for companies that are global and have a global presence will definitely lead you to opportunities, because I have already started working on projects in Brazil with some of our Brazilian colleagues, and now I'm kicking myself for not having learned Portuguese. I just had a call with one of them this afternoon, and of course, the truth is that English is the language of business these days, so, most of my colleagues work in English anyway, but again, like, having that connection, to be able to say even a few words, like as you were saying, I think really helps. And so I try to say like obrigada and everything. So I'm trying to learn Portuguese. But in terms of the soft skills, I would say that communication obviously is a big one. In consulting, you're often working with, so you're working with your client who have their interests, and then you're working with a regulatory agency or federal or local. So you really have to be able to know how to talk to different audiences, and we do a lot of report writing. So communication is huge, and I think especially in my industry, we have a lot of like hard science people who maybe didn't have the liberal arts education, and so they're a lot of great ideas, and it's very technical, but they don't know how to really translate that. So I think having the liberal arts background and having a dual degree with the geology and the French has been immensely helpful for me for doing things like writing reports and just in general communicating via email. Like it's really, I think, applicable to all skills, and also just putting yourself out there with learning a new language. When you're in consulting, you do have to put yourself out there a lot. You have to be kind of audacious, I would say. Even internally, you're not necessarily given work. You kind of have to seek out work. And if you want to build a good internal network so that people give you work, you kind of have to sell yourself a little bit to your own coworkers so that they know that you're someone who they can work with. So I feel like having moved to another country and like have to introduce yourself and like be in charge of this group of 13-year-olds, like it gives you a certain confidence and willingness to just put yourself out there and put yourself in situations that are maybe out of your comfort zone. So that's been super helpful. And in putting myself out there, I've definitely made it known to my office that I do speak French, even though it doesn't seem like we don't need it on like a daily basis. But I actually got to do a really fun project. About a year ago, we have a client in Ohio who's being managed out of our Pennsylvania office, and the project manager was looking for someone to translate a French report into English. And obviously we can pay for professional translators, but I think there was it was a draft, and it's kind of like a time versus money question. So someone said, hey, we have this girl Clementine, she speaks French, and so that gave me like a whole day of work, and I got to translate a safety audit from northern France, some small facility dealing with semiconductors, which I knew nothing about, and so it was really cool to like look up the vocab and learn new things. But in terms of just like the basis of the report and communicating what had to be said, that was like the most fun day ever for me. So again, it's kind of like my teaching thing where I don't want to be a translator full time, but the fact that my job allows me to do it when there's a need for it is really great. So I'm definitely kind of like building my networks, and people know that I have this skill. And I actually have been to our French office in Paris, and that was great because I got to just like work as if I was a little Parisian person, and I got to go out to lunch with my coworkers, and I got to connect with these people. We're all speaking French, but they got to tell me about their experiences, and they were telling me that a lot of the clients are English speaking, so like kind of the higher level stuff is in English, but all like the field staff and like on a more day-to-day basis, obviously everyone speaks French. So I use that as an opportunity to kind of do some networking, and then my friend from the Paris office came to visit me in Boston a few times, and he just got a new job, but like we're gonna stay in touch. So I'm kind of like building my network there. And it's very satisfying to know that I could do my current job in France or basically any other country in the world if I wanted to. And if I learned Portuguese, I could probably do it in Brazil. And then, so the final way, just to wrap up, that French has really shaped my life is I did get married to a French man, so that's why my last name is now hard to pronounce. We met when I was teaching abroad there, so he's moved here and we're in Boston for now, but in the long term, it's great to have the option to move back, and yeah, it's really followed me through my whole career and personal life now, and I really encourage people to, think about, it might not be like a direct correlation to your life, but I'm sure the soft skills and the hard skills will end up helping out, because it is such a globalized economy and world that we're living in that if you put yourself out there, I think you'll have a lot of opportunity to use these skills. So that's all. Thanks.
So I think I've sort of focused on how Japanese has helped me in my current career, which is in insurance, and less so how it helped me immediately after college when I was in Japan, learning the language more, doing research for the Fulbright, and also at Princeton, because in that sense it was area expertise for a political science IR person. So that those are kind of obvious, but I wanted to focus more on, which I think would be more useful to most of the people in the room, ways that language has helped me professionally that aren't quite so straightforward. You just assume. So in practice, at work, I'm working for Tokyo Marine. It's Japan's largest insurance carrier. They opened a branch in the U.S. 100 years ago, and it's grown and grown. And now, with a lot of Japanese investment in the economy over that time, the branch is here to service clients like Honda, clients like Toyota, Sony, big corporations. Mostly, we don't write personal lines in the U.S., which means we're not doing life insurance or auto insurance. So most individuals might not know about us, but companies would know. And in practice, I don't use Japanese every day. Maybe I would use it. I'd have a couple occasions throughout the week. But nevertheless, I'm almost certain it got me the job. And I'm quite certain that it helps me in a number of ways that are big benefits professionally. So I think my number one takeaway that I want to give to students, but also to professors when you're trying to communicate the merits of learning a language to students who are looking into their future, how is this going to help me pay my bills later on? Why don't I just study econ? I think I can offer a good answer to that question. So I'll just start with it. I think there's an impression when you're in college or studying a language, you get to third year and you realize I am not that fluent right now. I maybe I can't move right to Japan and start a job. And that might, or most probably is true, right, depending on how far along you are. And I think one thing it would be great for me if I had realized at the time, and for maybe a lot of students to realize, is that you don't need to be 100% fluent in your language for it to be a huge asset to you. If a company was, it's not like I'm studying a language I have to translate. If a company's going to hire you, you want them to hire you for a lot of reasons and not just your language. So what other skills do you bring to the company, technical or soft, personal skills? And when you're able to say to them, I use a language that means a lot to you in the business world, now you are the candidate of choice, right? You have something that really sets you apart and distinguishes all of your other skills. So that quite clearly happened to me. For example, I had to do my interview entirely in Japanese, which it turned out was just for the amusement of the man who hired me. But I think what it really did, at a very personal level, it told him this person has the experience I'm having. So he was sent to the U.S., no prior studying except for, the Japanese do study English extensively when they're young. It doesn't mean everybody gets very, very good. And certainly he was 40 when he came. Some of those skills are not so fresh. So this was a huge culture shock for him. He couldn't speak, couldn't listen, and he was in charge of the largest unit doing billions of dollars of business. And here's your US staff, and good luck. And that's sort of seen also, I don't know if all Japanese companies do this, but certainly my company seems to think that's a great way to toughen up their employees. So here he is, and he really struggled for 4 years and actually made a remarkable amount of progress in those 4 years. I think is amazing for his age, how much he was able to speak English. But so that's basically why he did it. He just interviewed me in Japanese. And I think my demonstration of how much I knew about Japan, I knew malls he'd been to in Yokohama, which terrified him. So how do you know about that? Well, it's there, we were able to connect, and he was able to see, oh, my company, for a Japanese major, this is really meaningful to her. Having a job here could be really meaningful to her. I think it's a safe bet to invest in this person. And the way he invested was to set me up with a one-on-one mentor and train me to make me a full underwriter within a year. And usually that takes about 5 years in an insurance company where you're deciding the terms and conditions of the policy and the pricing. And he put me in what's called the highly protected risk unit, which usually takes you about 10 or 20 years to get in, because you're dealing with a factory worth $200 million, or Honda's manufacturing operations, Tesla's lithium battery factory. But he was able to say, for personal reasons and also for being able to see that I identified with this company in a way that he doesn't expect me to walk out the door tomorrow. There's an added value for him, and there's an added value for me as a Japanese language learner being connected with this company. So that was a huge benefit for me, especially relative to other candidates. So I do think it got me the job, and in practice, the way I'm using language day to day, insurance is very legal. You don't want to be practicing on insurance policies your Japanese language. It ends up in court and it's ambiguous, and I don't want to be. But what happens in practice is when we call them expatriates, are rotated into the office, I'm almost their instant friend, right? I'm the highlight of the tour around the office. This girl can speak your language. They're so relieved. And I find that it's very personally rewarding for me to be of assistance to those expatriates in the way that a lot of my Japanese friends were to me. I mean, when you move to another country, all of a sudden buying groceries and going to the post office is a nightmare. You have to practice for it. So you have to write down your vocab, I once had a horrible emergency where my little toilet in Japan was overflowing, and I realized I don't know the word for plumber. And I couldn't describe there's like a little hand washing spot above the toilets in Japan. I don't know what to call that. Even if I knew the word for plumber, not quite sure I know how to say the water's coming out, it's everywhere. So I really sympathize with those expatriates who are dropped on the ground here. And they come to me for small things like, what is the medicine in the U.S. safe? This is the medicine cabinet. What do I take? I'm dying. I also have, quite high-level senior management come running to my desk and say, I just sent you an email. Can you make sure that translation is correct? And that's really big. For the company, too, that translates into efficiency. It can translate into productivity gains. Even though my job description does not formally say this person's function is to translate to Japanese to English or something like that. I'm still using it, and it's still a great benefit professionally and also personally for me to connect with the expatriates more. It can really open doors for you in a global company, like I think a lot of people have said, especially if you speak the language of the senior management that's incoming. You can help them, you can connect with them. You're privy to some of the workings of the company that maybe other people wouldn't be, because so-and-so is relying on you to make sure that he's communicating properly with his staff and that sort of thing. And you can have an opportunity then to demonstrate your other skills that aren't language, what am I doing for the company as an insurance person, not as a Japanese speaker, that should be recognized and rewarded. And that opens doors for you to either we have a home office in Japan, so you can end up there. When the CEO comes, I get him the longest because he finds out he can speak to me for a long time. So those are all ways that I think, even if, the obvious conclusion of I'm studying a language in college, how is this going to help me in my career, doesn't have to be I'm going to translate, or my job description will necessarily say Japanese. It can still get you the job. You can still be a benefit in terms of real money terms, that efficiency, productivity, sort of communication in the office, environment in the office. These are serious monetary gains that translate into money. So I think that kind of is my major thing that I wanted to communicate, is just when you're thinking about it and you're trying to sell this to students, there are just so many ways that you can't really predict as of right now that this is going to open doors for you or help you. I guess another personal way it's helped for me is again this idea of networking. When you are devoted to a language and you get to a certain point, learning about the culture, learning about the people, you're kind of in this little cosmopolitan group of actual global citizens, So I was able to join something called the Japan America Student Conference, and that put me in touch with a lot of graduates from top universities in my age group, and we've still stayed in touch. And those are great contacts for me, professionally and personally. We're great friends, but I also know a lot of very successful young professionals now, and that's been very beneficial even in my current job, which I could never have predicted. So I think that's kind of the end then of formal comments, and I can also talk about language as relates to graduate school or the Fulbright if anybody had questions on those, but I think those are more straightforward maybe.
So we'll open up now for questions. If anybody has any questions for our panelists.
I'm just wondering, when you guys took language, how time consuming would you say it was for you during undergrad and with your majors? Like how long, like each day, how much practice did you put towards it?
Well, I came in already speaking French, and I'd taken AP French in high school, so that enabled me to start at the 300 level. So I feel very lucky that I don't think I had to spend too much time on it, like any more than any normal class. Because I already had that kind of leg up with the AP stuff, I was able to do the double major without really stressing myself out too much. So me personally, also I went to Dijon, so that knocked out a lot of credits for me. But I can't speak to like if you're starting a brand new language, because I didn't do that at Colgate. So for me, it wasn't a big deal, but I don't know if you guys have input.
Yeah, I started taking Italian at Colgate, so it was 4 days a week, I think, the first 2 years. To be honest, I put quite a bit into it just because I enjoyed it a lot. I don't remember like how much each day or anything, but it's kind of like you get what you put into it, so that's why I did put a lot into it.
I put a lot of time into it. At one point I was taking 2 classes at once, I think, which was great because she said, look at this girl, she could just take 2 at once. And that was actually really helpful for me. So I could make the most of my study abroad. So I was putting a lot of time, and I think it also depends on the language. I spent so long in front of kanji character flashcards that, but I think it is one of those things where it is how much you put in, you get out, and so the more you can maybe the more you should do it. But I think the more you do it here, I personally found that it was recognized and encouraged, and so yeah, throw yourself at it.
And then too, one thing I recommend is like I liked meeting with the Italian interns in my year as well. So I would go and like have coffee with them and just, you know, talk to them in Italian, just because like that really helps as well, because learning it in the classroom is one thing from the textbook, but then when you have a conversation, for me that was quite different. So that helped a lot as well.
What advice would you guys have for students who are studying abroad?
Well, I was going to actually add to what you just said, the putting the effort in when you are abroad, forcing yourself not to hang out with other English speakers is huge. And I did a Colgate study group, which I think you both did as well. And so that was kind of hard to navigate, because you don't want to like brush, you know, your Colgate friends off either. So you do kind of have to put the effort in to like separate yourself out from the group. And I was also lucky to have in Dijon, you have a homestay component. So that also forces you to really stick to only speaking that language. So yeah, it takes some effort. And I feel like when you do go abroad, a lot of people want to practice their English with you. So you really kind of have to set boundaries. And, you know, you also don't want to be rude about it, but you do have to really put the effort in to show them that you are here to speak their language as well, and it's like a two-way street. So it's a lot about intention, I think, and really being aware that it's easy to get away with not speaking other languages.
Yeah, that's my biggest regret, I think, from going abroad, is that because I went on the Colgate group as well, I wish I hung out with more Italian students. So yeah, I think too, I was kind of nervous to speak Italian at first, just because I was like, oh, I'm probably going to say something really weird or something. I wish I overcame that sooner, just so I like really put myself out there.
I think very much echoing that. And I would be really, really strict about it. Do not speak to English speakers. Don't do it. But really don't. I mean, really don't. I wish it was any easier. If your brain is not forced into the position where you must now think about it, the way to say this, you can always kind of fall back and be lazy by no fault of your own. Your brain just is supposed to make shortcuts and makes you successful in other areas of your life, you know. I would really recommend trying to find it where your interests actually genuinely line up with someone else's who only speaks the language that you're targeting. Sometimes, you know, they'll put you all together, you know, as part of these study abroad groups, and it's like, oh, you're a student, I'm a student, and it doesn't really go anywhere, because that relationship does have to be organic and natural. I found a man in Japan who opened a dog cafe, and I walked in there. He speaks absolutely no English. He was very excited there was an American here, and he talked my ear off. And to this day, I still, when I try to say something new, I can sometimes hear him saying it, you know? And I remember sitting on the train preparing to tell him one story, because it was that hard. So I'd be practicing on the train. I want to communicate this about what happened to me today. I can only pick one thing. And I would practice it. And sometimes it'd fall flat and I have no idea what you're saying. But other times it went really well, and it became easier and easier until the day that I didn't notice I wasn't preparing on the train anymore. And I was given as good as I got in terms of talking his ear off. But our interest in dogs allowed this to happen. So it was very natural in that sense. And there was a reason for us to fight to be able to communicate to each other. And once you make one friend like that, then you can kind of steal their friends. You'll find other people with the interest, and you really have to be, in the first couple weeks until you find that, it's very hard not to just fall into the habit of meeting with your study group friends, but you can't do it. That's like number one thing I would say. And that's how I ended up with my dog. Because this man is a breeder and he bred a little poodle, and I got it, so. That's really cute. Yeah.
So I'm a senior, and what I'm really worried about next year is it'll be my first year without formal language instruction. So I'm just wondering, after you guys graduated, what have you done to make sure that not only that you keep up with the language, but that you're growing as well?
Well, I feel very lucky because I was in France the year after I graduated, and that really, that was full immersion, basically, other than the English classes. And yeah, I also just had created these friends in Dijon that when I was studying abroad there, that I stayed in touch with, and so I saw them the entire year I was in France, and then I met my now husband, and so we speak French at home, and so I don't know if I can speak that much to your question, other than make friends who speak French. But I would also say I need to get better about actively seeking out things like podcasts and movies, because I think my husband's French is getting worse as well from living in America. So we actually have been talking about, like, we need to put the radio on. There's actually some really good French radio stations that are free that you can just stream. FIP is like our favorite, like France Ontario. But I mean, I don't know if you guys have better advice than that, other than just staying in touch with people you meet when you're abroad, and you can try to find those people wherever in the city that you end up. We haven't had such good luck with that with the French speakers in Boston, because they're very kind of like cliquey, which is like the expat that I never wanted to be in France, but they're kind of being in Boston. So yeah, we haven't been that good about it, but you can go to Montreal. It's not that far away. So I don't know, keeping up the travel, keeping up the podcasts and movies, and just and books as well. I'm trying to get better about reading just like normal modern French books and not things from the 18th century. So yeah, I mean, no offense, but yeah. So I would say like Amazon or something, you can get normal modern French books, and some of them are like really easy to read and very satisfying. So I recommend that. But if you guys have more advice.
Yeah, unfortunately in Calgary there's practically no English or Italian speakers there, so it's kind of unfortunate. But yeah, I was worried after I graduated that I would lose a lot, and unfortunately I did lose some of it. But I still watch Italian film and I read Italian news, and I also have some books in Italian too that I read in summers and things like that. But it's actually kind of amazing how it comes back to you, because like weirdly enough, I was in the library on campus on Tuesday in Calgary, and there was this girl on the phone, and she was just speaking Italian, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop or anything, obviously, but I could understand like every single word that she was saying. So it was really great how it just like came back like that.
Yeah, the way I've most kept up is probably speaking with friends that I had back in Japan, and I think you'd be pleasantly surprised how little maintenance you end up needing. I think what happens more, at least personally for me, is I'll try to speak, and the word that comes to my mind first is the English word, and I have to wait for the retrieval system to get the Japanese word, but it's there. It takes longer. So it's just that it's not coming out as quickly. And I find, like when I prepared for my interview for the company I'm with now, after 2 days of prepping with a native speaker, I was quite fluent again. I was pretty shocked. So I think you'd be surprised. Making friends is another one, or I guess it would just have to be deliberately committing in your schedule to either online classes. There's a ton of those. I like the little phone apps, but as soon as you get to like level 400, the phone app doesn't quite cut it anymore, unfortunately. So, but it depends on where you're at. So if you're not at level 400, you can still do your level 200 app.
So I have a question. None of you really took like a direct path to your careers. I think, especially when you study a language, you often get the question from well-meaning parents or uncles, what are you going to do with that, right? And I think if you end up taking, like all of you did, this less direct path to your career, people can kind of think that what you're doing is a waste of time or not really clear how you're going to be useful. So it seems like you all have used your experiences to great advantage. But along the way, like basically, how did you deal with the doubters? What did you do with them?
I think you're right. What I did in the end, and that's one of the things I wanted to be the takeaway from what I used to say, is you're looking at an intersection of what other things you're getting from Colgate, research skills, analytical skills, personal skills, communication, leadership, all of that. And then I have this language, and sometimes I think people see them as, well, that one's more career path and this one isn't. This is out of the picture. The language pieces don't even, you're not going to become a translator, but you're really looking for the intersection of that because it matches your interests. It also helps you narrow down companies. And it also makes the company take a serious look at you if we're talking about, companies. And I also think in terms of doubters, I think more often than not, I had encouragers who were like, wow, that's got to just be so useful. And, wow. And in practice, I remember third or fourth year thinking, I really want to use this. How am I going to use this? Grad school is the obvious way that I could use this. And that was wrong. That was actually completely wrong. It costs a lot of money to go to Japan. You better find that funding. So I think it's more, unfortunately, there's not a lot. I think you either have people that are just think that's fabulous and are so supportive, and there's no real guidance for people who've had that experience, at least for me personally. And now I'm able to say, oh, it'll help you. It's just a matter of making that intersection and then letting it enhance what other skills you have. Because they're not going to hire you because you speak Japanese. They can hire a Japanese speaker, and that's not why you want them to hire you. You have a lot more to yourself than that, And just a small point on international romance. I, too, am going to probably or will marry an Italian person. And I had a lot of doubters about this who said to me, well, he's in Italy. What are you? You don't speak the same language. But him as an English learner and me as a Japanese learner, we're very used to circumlocution to get to what are you trying to tell me, and these situations. And to me, I had people say to me, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to go over there? Well, yeah, I do that all the time. I think it opens for you, it's not that big of a, I'll go over there, I'll learn the train system, I'll meet him. His family doesn't speak English, it's all right, I deal with that a lot. I think for me, there was something about what I was doing was inconceivable to doubter people. And for me, it was like, no, I've done this before several times. And that was really helpful for accomplishing an important life goal that's not professional.
Well, since I mentioned I did the gap year in between high school and college, and that was kind of like I want to call it like a freebie, it was kind of it was easy for me to sell that to my parents because I already had gotten accepted at Colgate, and they knew that I was going to come back and, do what you were supposed to do. So I feel like already having that one gap year made me realize, I don't have to go straight into college, or I don't have to go straight into the career that I want. And there were a lot of people before me at Colgate who had done the TEPIF program and came back and, started their career. And I did feel very encouraged by the French department to do TEPIF. And again, it was only designed to be a year, so I knew that I was going to end up coming back from it. But yeah, I think I feel like the culture has changed. I think gap years are more and more kind of popular. 10 years ago when I did a gap year, I felt like and no one had ever heard of it before. But now it seems very commonplace. And I think people have gotten over the whole traditional career path. And I also knew that if I didn't do it, that I would not only regret it, but that I would probably end up freaking out and doing it anyway, years down the line. At my current company, right about the time that I started, there were actually two women around my age who had been with the company right after graduation, and they both left, one to teach in Colombia and the other one to, I believe, Costa Rica. So I feel like they both kind of had that freak out moment of, oh my God, I'm in my career for the rest of my life. And so, great for them. That's fine too. You can wait to do these kinds of things. But for me, I wanted to do it right away because I knew what I wanted to do. But I will say the TEPIF program, I believe you can apply until you're 30. So I could still just freak out and go back and do that and work 12 hours a week. So just saying, if you don't do it right after graduation, it's always an option. So.
Yeah, I don't want to say I had any doubters along the way. I mean, especially my parents have always been really supportive, especially when I told them I wanted to do international development. I think it's because when I was 17, I went to Africa by myself for a summer with National Geographic. And so that, I think they just kind of got used to the idea at that point. And just very, very encouraging. I guess the only thing that I really encountered was going back to Vancouver Island after I graduated from Colgate. I actually did have a hard time because I looked for jobs in Vancouver for a while, and I did have a hard time with that just because with international relations and Italian, those are two things that, you know, they're not very sought after in Vancouver. But the thing is, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work abroad, so I was just very, very patient, and I kept applying for international jobs and positions and just kind of waited for that to happen. So I guess that's really the only obstacle that I faced, but I did take kind of a roundabout route to my career, and I mean, I'm not a lawyer yet, but yeah, I mean, I could just say it's really helped me thus far.
Yeah, I feel like that was something I was able to take with me. I had a huge went straight into academia, Fulbright, learn more language, apply to Princeton. And I can't really take IR with me, but my language skills I can take any career I end up going to or any place I want to apply them. So I think that's a really good point for people thinking about, well, what career does this lead to? You're probably going to have multiple careers in multiple industries, and maybe your geology skills aren't going to help you in one of them, but your language skills will translate somehow into all of them, I think.
If there's no more questions, then we can give them a warm thank you.